41.0618 north, 71.8744 west. Why does the isotopic signature of this abandoned radar station suggest a localized rupture in the fabric of the four-dimensional manifold? Declassified Project Pegasus logs indicate that this specific coordinate served as a terminal for radiant energy experiments, where temporal displacement was achieved through the manipulation of high-frequency electromagnetic pulses. The data is not human. The concept of a linear historical record is a clandestine deception. If the past is a locked vault, how do we explain the presence of artifacts that suffer from a severe anthropological dissonance? The Bralorne Photograph of 1941 serves as a forensic anchor. Analysis of the silver halide grain stratigraphy confirms that the modern silhouettes within the frame were present at the moment of exposure, leaving no room for the theory of post-production manipulation. In the year 2000, an entity designated as John Titor provided technical specifications for the IBM 5100 that were classified as proprietary. How does a civilian identify a hidden hardware-level emulation protocol 4 years before the manufacturer publicly acknowledges its existence? This specific microarchitecture, capable of translating legacy code from the 1960s, represents a subterranean void in the official history of computing, suggesting that Titor's presence was a calculated temporal leak. Reality is a geopolitical fracture waiting to shatter. Are we mere observers of time, or are we the collateral damage of a temporal experiment that began at Camp Hero? The isotopic signatures found at these anomalous sites suggest that our timeline has been overwritten multiple times, leaving only the faintest lithic echoes of what we used to be. You have been taught that the past is a fixed state. You were lied to. The stratigraphy of human memory is being actively rewritten by forces that operate outside of our perceived chronological flow. Wait for the data to settle. It is already too late to return to the original sequence. Mainstream historiography is a curated hallucination designed to preserve the status quo of a stagnant civilization. How can we trust the chronological record when the isotopic signature of our own history remains internally inconsistent? The stratigraphy of human events is littered with anomalous artifacts that the academic establishment classifies as hoaxes to avoid the total collapse of their fragile paradigms. The Bralorne Photograph of 1941 is not a trick of the light. It is a violent intrusion of future technology into a primitive era. Is it logically sound to categorize a high-wrap, polarized lens as commonplace during a period of global scarcity and primitive glassmithing? Forensic analysis of the subject's eyewear reveals a refractive index and a polarization coating that require a vacuum deposition process not patented until 1968. The technology was physically impossible. The official explanation that this was merely a modern-looking individual is a clandestine attempt to ignore the mathematical impossibility of his attire. The John Titor incident represents a fatal error in the preservation of the timeline's subterranean void. If Titor was a fraudulent entity, how did he possess the specific, unlisted assembly language requirements for the IBM 5100's hidden emulation layer? The probability of an outsider identifying the 360 series microcode compatibility without internal access to the IBM development labs is statistically zero. It is a geopolitical fracture in the history of computer science. This wasn't a guess. It was a forensic retrieval from a future where that knowledge was common. The Montauk Project is dismissed as an urban legend despite the persistent isotopic signature of high-frequency temporal scarring at Camp Hero. Why does the soil at these specific coordinates exhibit a non-linear decay rate that defies the standard laws of entropy? LiDAR scans of the subterranean levels reveal a network of tunnels that do not appear on any official blueprints, structured with a lithic precision that suggests they were carved using a directed energy source. The data is not human. The mainstream refusal to acknowledge these subterranean voids is an act of extreme anthropological dissonance. The unified field theory, as postulated by Einstein, was not a theoretical failure, but a clandestine success that necessitated a total informational blackout. If the USS Eldridge never disappeared, why did the Naval Archives for the summer of 1943 contain a subterranean void of precisely 48 hours in the ship's log? The math required to shunt a physical mass out of the light cone involves a petroglyphic manipulation of the local gravitational constant, a feat the official story claims we haven't achieved. The mathematical models are clear. The 1901 time slip at Versailles is a forensic case study in temporal folding rather than psychological trauma. Can two independent witnesses hallucinate the exact architectural layout of a 1789 estate that had been razed over a century before their birth? Isotopic analysis of their detailed accounts perfectly aligns with the lost blueprints found in the clandestine archives of the French Ministry of Culture in 1960. This is not a ghost story. It is a localized rupture in the Minkowski spacetime manifold that allowed for a cross-temporal observation. Academic consensus is the ultimate tool of suppression used to hide the fragility of our existence. Why do we accept the comfort of a linear lie over the cold, clinical reality of a broken timeline? The forensic evidence points toward a civilization that has been repeatedly edited, leaving only the anomalous debris of what we were or what we will become. The manifold is bleeding. The Earth is not a static rock. It is a resonant temporal antenna. Why do temporal ruptures occur exclusively at geodesic intersection points across the planetary crust? Quantitative mapping of the Schumann resonance reveals that the 7.83 Hz frequency acts as a carrier wave for non-local information transfer, directly correlating with the magnetospheric interference patterns found at the 41.0618 north coordinate. The planet is broadcasting. The distance between the Montauk facility and the Great Pyramid of Giza is exactly 29.979 degrees of arc, the numerical equivalent of the speed of light in a vacuum, 299,792,458 meters per second. Is this a numerical coincidence or a petroglyphic blueprint for a global transit system that renders distance irrelevant? Geometric analysis of the Earth's crustal displacement suggests that these sites are linked by a subterranean void of electromagnetic flux, facilitating a clandestine synchronization of temporal events across the longitudinal divide. CIA Document 84-00461 R 0001-0005-0001-7, part of Project Scanitate, confirms that human consciousness can bypass the Schwarzschild radius of localized time. If the mind is not bound by the fourth dimension, why do we continue to view our physical bodies as chronological prisoners? The data recovered during the Stargate protocols indicates that remote viewing is not an extrasensory perception, but a forensic observation of the universal isotopic signature that connects every point in history to the present moment. The past is simultaneous. Temporal stability is tethered to the solar cycle. How many urban legends of mass disappearances align perfectly with the peak of the 11-year solar maximum? Coronal mass ejections produce a violent fluctuation in the Earth's ionosphere, creating the exact energy threshold required to trigger a lithic shift in the local space-time fabric, rendering the physical world permeable to the subterranean void. Every atom in your body carries a clandestine timestamp based on its isotopic signature. What happens when the atomic clock within a biological organism no longer matches the environmental stratigraphy? Forensic pathology of Project Pegasus participants reveals an accelerated cellular entropy that suggests their internal chronology was forcibly desynchronized from the planetary grid during high-output temporal pulses. They are aging in a different sequence than the world around them. The ancients did not build temples, they anchored temporal nodes. Is it possible that the megalithic structures at 29.9792 degrees north are not tombs, but stabilizing anchors for a global geopolitical fracture in time? Mathematical modeling of the lithic alignment at Stonehenge reveals a precession of the equinoxes that functions as a celestial combination lock. The lock is turning. The IBM 5100's hidden APL and basic translation layers were specifically designed to interface with the legacy 360 series mainframes used in early temporal simulation. Why would a commercial computer in 1975 require the capability to process the exact algorithmic structures used by the Department of Defense for atmospheric ionization modeling? The stratigraphy of the 5100's hardware reveals a clandestine architecture that mirrors the signal processing units found at the 41.0618 North node, suggesting the machine was a critical component in the synchronization of the 1975 and 2000 temporal planes. Time is a crystalline structure, and we are currently experiencing a fracture in its core. Does the global increase in anomalous temporal reports indicate a systemic failure of the Earth's magnetic containment? Data from the Deep Space Climate Observatory, DSCOVR, shows a subterranean void in the magnetosphere that matches the exact coordinates of the most frequent time slip claims reported in the last decade. We are no longer shielded from the bleed of other realities. The Madelung constant of the Earth's crystalline lattice is being manipulated by high-energy physics experiments at CERN and Montauk. Are we accelerating toward a point of infinite anthropological dissonance where history ceases to exist as a coherent narrative? The isotopic signatures of the latest time slips show a 40% increase in radioactive carbon-14 spikes that have no corresponding nuclear event in our recorded stratigraphy. The universal nexus is not a place, but a condition. If the Earth's magnetic field continues to weaken, will the clandestine barriers between 1941, 1975, and the present finally dissolve? The data suggests that the time-traveling hipster and John Titor are not visitors. They are survivors of a future that has already collapsed into our own. Wait for the synchronization. The grid is failing. The data is final. The hoax narrative is a statistical impossibility that fails to account for the physical trace of temporal intrusion. Can a simple prankster manifest hardware protocols and isotopic signatures that have not yet been recorded in our official stratigraphy? Forensic examination of the Titor documentation reveals a subterranean void in the transistor logic of the IBM 5100, one that mirrors the non-binary cooling systems found in clandestine aerospace wreckage recovered at the Roswell coordinate. The hardware is not ours. We are not the architects of time. We are merely the scavengers of a non-human technology. Why does the isotopic signature of temporal displacement precisely match the cosmic radiation spikes recorded during the 1908 Tunguska event? Detailed analysis of the petroglyphic data from the Göbekli Tepe pillars reveals a lithic calibration for the Earth's magnetic poles that functions as a celestial clock for a planned geopolitical fracture of the timeline. Humanity did not invent time travel. We inherited a derelict system from a civilization that viewed our entire history as a mere resource. Dismissing these anomalies as psychological trauma or urban legend is a symptom of severe anthropological dissonance. If these accounts were merely the product of mental illness, why does the carbon-14 dating of the soil at the 41.0618 north coordinate show a literal reversal of the radioactive decay curve? Through a cold process of elimination, we are left with a single clinical reality. Our timeline is being actively harvested by a non-human intelligence using high-tech antiquity. The time travelers we see in grainy photographs are not explorers. They are clandestine operatives performing forensic maintenance on a failing reality. Humanity is currently hot-wiring a machine it does not have the cognitive capacity to understand. Are we the masters of the fourth dimension, or are we the biological collateral damage of an extraterrestrial geopolitical fracture? Every time a temporal pulse is triggered at Camp Hero, we are ripping a hole in the stratigraphy of the human narrative that no amount of denial can repair. The manifold is shredding. The official story is a clandestine shroud designed to hide the fact that our past is being rewritten by entities that regard our existence as a subterranean void. We are the glitch. Your memories are not biological recordings. They are residual isotopic signatures of a previous, discarded version of reality. If your identity can be deleted by a clandestine update to the temporal stratigraphy, does the concept of existence retain any mathematical value? Advanced neural mapping suggests that false memories are actually a form of anthropological dissonance, a survival mechanism for the brain when forced to reconcile two conflicting timelines within the same subterranean void. The data is already changing. The 41.0618 north coordinate is currently broadcasting a lithic frequency designed to stabilize the next geopolitical fracture by overwriting the current narrative. Will you detect the shift in your own history, or will you blindly accept the new record as the only truth you have ever known? The terminal decay of the local Minkowski manifold confirms that the sequence of human cause and effect has permanently detached from the universal axis, leaving us as anomalous fragments in a dying system. The record is void. If the person you were 10 minutes ago no longer exists in the current stratigraphy, who is the entity that remains to witness the end?